Hello and welcome to day one of Bring Your Own Bold 2025. Wow, this has been a long time in the making. The team here at ShapeBuy have absolutely excelled themselves in pulling together an incredible program of content for you all to dive into over the next 3 days. And beyond that too, in fact, in case you're not aware of how things are going to work this year, each day features a live panel session, just like this one. Plus a bunch more interviews, conversations, videos, Figma boards, and all sorts of other interactive content onto the event platform that you can watch and play with at your leisure. Each day is themed, so all the topics link back to that theme, a little loosely in places, but that's all part of the fun. Now, we've never done this like this before in terms of Bring Your Own Bold. It is a bit of a bold move. But as the name suggests, this is Bring Your Own Bold. If we don't live up to our own mantra, then what are we doing it all for? So please do dive into what we're pushing out over the next few days, immerse yourselves in it all, and do let us know what you think. We'd love to know. Right, on to this session. It's so good to have you all with us for the first of our daily live panel discussions. Today's theme for BYOB, as we've affectionately started calling Bring Your Own Bold, or BYOB sometimes, is the foundations of boldness, exploring how creative brand and marketing leaders can ensure the right foundational elements are in place for building a truly bold B2B brand. And when it comes to the foundational elements of many B2B businesses, especially in the tech space, they don't get more foundational than product design and brand design. But have you ever come across a brand experience that you instantly connect and resonate with, only to find that the experience of using the product simply doesn't match? Or perhaps the other way around, using the product suddenly feels like you're in the future, but then engaging with the brand suddenly feels like you're stuck in the past. So how can you set the foundations for these two vital aspects of your business to coexist in perfect harmony? To drill down into it all, I am delighted to be joined by three wonderful guests today, who I'm just going to quickly introduce to you all. First up, we have Audrey Nar. Audrey is the VP of Design at Radar, an all-in-one geolocation platform headquartered in New York City. Audrey oversees brand and product design at Radar, and during her 20 plus years of experience, she's also led creative teams at agencies serving major clients like T-Mobile and Alaska Airlines, as well as designing and executing a global brand refresh at AWS. Might not mention AWS again in this session. It's a bit triggering for some people after the last couple of days. At Radar, she led a strategic brand refresh and focuses on building thoughtful design teams while blurring boundaries between brand and product design to create meaningful customer journeys. It's great to have you with us, Audrey. Next up is Rachel Gogel. Rachel is an independent design executive and educator who spent time both in-house at the likes of Airbnb, New York Times, and Meta, and agency side as well. She founded her own consultancy in 2020, collaborating with global organizations as a fractional leader, and was named one of Creative Boom's 20 graphic designers inspiring us the most in 2025. Rachel is a queer advocate championing marginalized voices and addresses industry inequity through her mentorship commitments, speaking engagements, published writing, and active involvement in purpose-driven initiatives. And finally, I'm thrilled that we're joined by David Wall, who is the creative director at the workflow automation company Tynes. David is a vastly experienced design leader who's led and collaborated on award-winning design work for a huge range of organizations across technology, hospitality, culture, and publishing. Very much like Rachel, David gives back to the industry through education, writing, and public speaking, and he's particularly active in the Irish design community, currently holding the position of the president of the IDI, the Institute of Designers in Ireland, and co-founding the 100 Archive, a platform celebrating Ireland's rich design heritage. What a lineup. I'm so excited to get into this one. Thank you, all three of you, for joining me today. Let's do it. Now, we talked about foundations, and what is more foundational when discussing a topic like this than getting your team and org structures aligned and set up for success. So I'd like to start there, if that's okay. David, I know this is something you guys at Tynes put a lot of conscious effort into, so I'll start with you. Can you tell us how the brand and product design teams are set up over there?
Sure, yeah, and Dave, thanks for having me today. The At times the brand team that I lead is part of the broader design team, and that whole team sits within product. So I think I found that really I suppose, kind of really interesting because it gives us that kind of ability to be really closely aligned. I think in a culture, in the way that we think about shaping the kind of the mindset of iterating, that isn't necessarily native to the kind of the typical operations of a brand team, is very much something that we take from our relationship and our kind of place as part of the product side of the organization.
Sorry, I was trying not to cough there. I've got a bad cough today. Yeah, no, that's super, super interesting. And I understand that this is your first design role or first in-house design role. Did it surprise you that the team was set up like that when you joined the team?
It didn't at first, uh, as you say, this is my first in-house role, so I would have had experience in kind of studio and agency life until now. Over time, it's kind of I've found it almost surprising that folks would work in a different way, because I think like one of the things that is really important to my work and the work of my team is the ability to move fast. And so that kind of proximity to the point that we are kind of one kind of broader team, and the fact that brand is embedded within product, that proximity gives us an ability to have, I suppose, to be in the room as product is being conceived of and developed, and it allows us to kind of to respond to how we communicate about product, how we think about the kind of the journeys that we want people to take until the point that they get into the product, in a way that is not about kind of getting a report about what we think their experience will be, but really a kind of a much kind of deeper understanding of what we hope their experience will be. So yeah, I've seen other folks presenting and speaking about, kind of struggles where these kind of chasms grow between brand design teams and product design teams, which I can only imagine is an incredibly challenging environment in which to do the kind of work that I have to do, because you're asking to be led into the room when we're kind of just hanging out there, and we get to kind of to share the space with our colleagues in product. In a kind of practical way, that looks like kind of we have critique sessions. We have 2 a week. They're kind of my two favorite sessions of the week. Hour-long sessions with the whole team across brand design and product design. Gets to show work in progress, things we're trying out, things that we've just finished. And it's a lovely environment, not just because I think they're a talented bunch, um, but because we get those perspectives on our work and brand from the folks who are coming from the product side, and then likewise we get to kind of give our perspective on the work that they're developing and creating. So I just really love that kind of interplay and kind of conversational interaction that exists between those two teams, because they're kind of sitting side by side in the org structure.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound perfect. It sounds ideal, to be honest. I want to come to you, Rachel. You've worked across multiple different teams. I mean, it David's setup sounds ideal, but is there an ideal org structure for optimum brand and product design cohesion in your opinion?
Uh, Honestly, I feel like there's no one size fits all answer, and I think that's actually a good thing. So, what I've noticed is that, different company stages or industries and business models may require different structures. So, I've actually seen brand teams thrive in like people orgs when the focus is employer branding or employee experiences, or they work really well in marketing for brand awareness and growth. And increasingly, based on this topic, I am seeing a lot more brand teams embedded within product organizations, especially when the digital product is the primary touch point. And what I've learned is that when brand sits far from product design, both organizationally and like physically, disconnects can happen. So, for example, the brand team may create beautiful guidelines, but then the product teams find them impractical to implement if they're not communicating. Or on the flip side, product designers may make decisions that then inadvertently dilute the brand. So I love this question because I feel like what matters most isn't necessarily the org chart, but it's the relationships between the teams and then the clarity around their roles and responsibilities. And so, what I've noticed with the more successful organizations I've worked with is just having these more established, um, I don't know, what's often referred to as like brand governance. So, more clear protocols for when and how the brand should be involved with product decisions from early concept to final implementation. And so, whether that's dotted line relationships or embedded team members or regular cross functional rituals, I know David just mentioned a few, really creating those structural connections is essential. I did work at Facebook. That scale was immense. We had to be very intentional about when those connections happened. Or more recently, with one of my roles at Airbnb, I was witnessing how brand and product could more perfectly work, like symbiotically, when the organizational structure supported collaboration rather than creating certain barriers. And what I've also learned is that uh, speaking the language of business is essential when building these structures. So when I've advocated for brand integration, or I've seen other creative leaders do that, they don't just talk about aesthetics, they talk about differentiation, user retention, conversion rates, lifetime value. And that's what gets executives to invest in those structural connections that make brand product cohesion possible. So all this to say, no matter where you sit, you can think of it as like a horizontal team that maybe ladders up into different parts of the business, and then having a leadership team in place that believes in investing in brand, and then like that shared DNA to ensure that you're not just getting caught up in the visual aspects of the brand, but then staying consistent. There's that flow of strategy across the teams and functions. Um, and I'll just close by saying that I do think it's a mindset shift. I think, again, we can talk about org structures all day long. But if you start thinking about brand as experience and not brand as decoration, it can become really transformative for your company. It changes how you structure the teams, how you approach design problems, and then ultimately how users perceive and connect with your product. So kind of pushing it beyond just like an org structure conversation, I think, is important.
Yeah, definitely. I just wondered, as you were speaking there, do you feel that it's that those principles of openness and governance need to be in place regardless of the size of the team? Is there any kind of suggestion that certain sizes of organization work better in certain kind of closer proximity to each other, or is it just regardless of size, it's really those bedrocks of brand experience that need to be in place for things to succeed?
I think you're touching on something really important. I mean, I do think that the earlier companies, even in early stage startups, or, seeds that are getting planted, understanding brand from the beginning and the relationship to the product. And again, it kind of depends on like who's building that company, who's sitting in leadership roles, and how they understand those relationships and that investment. Uh, I Establishing brand governance or brand principles, it may be one of those things that happens over time, uh, based on the maturity of the product or the company, and that's okay. I think just having open dialogue and kind of creating space in order to talk about brand as a team, and whether it's time to fully invest in building a full team or establishing principles, like that could be a moment in time for the company. So I don't think it's essential from the beginning to have that, and that would make it successful off the bat. But knowing that that could only help probably the process, is a good thing. But it tends to come with a slightly more mature company size, and again, it kind of depends on who is starting that company, or who's leading the charge, and how they understand design and brand, um, and just again, if you don't have those people in place, then there are plenty of people who work within that space that you could hire or lean on to get those types of things in place earlier.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Just a quick plug for another session in BYOB that relates to a lot of that, which is a company called Island, who were founded in 2021. 4 years later, they were worth somewhere kind of around the $5 billion mark, and a big part of that story was because they aligned brand, product, and category right from the very beginning. So I think that session's coming out tomorrow, but it might be Thursday. But either way, I'd urge anyone watching this to go and check that one out as well, if that's something that interests you. Audrey, I'll come to you, if that's okay with you. Now, you lead brand and product design at Radar. We'll come on to a lot of what your role encompasses in a little while, but I just wanted to start by asking you why Radar chose to place brand and product design under a single leader in yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. Really excited to be here. It's actually a really great segue from Rachel, like what she was sharing. And I have to say, it really starts at the top at Radar. And I have to really just give full credit to our CEO and co-founder, Nick Patrick. He's a product guy at heart, but one who equally values great design. And, historically, Radar always had strong product design leadership, but it took several years. I want to say maybe like 7 years before they hired their first creative director, which was me. And, when I first started, we had the more typical org structure. So product design reported to a VP of product, and I reported to a VP of marketing. Pretty soon after, there was some restructuring, and executive leadership made the decision to combine product and brand design under one design leader reporting directly to the CEO. And I was fortunate enough to be given that opportunity, which eventually led to my current role as VP of design. I think as for the why, it comes down to, three things which are perfectly captured in the synopsis of this panel discussion. I think first, it really created better alignment across the entire organization. So from leadership, vision, all the way down to engineering, marketing, and sales, everyone's moving in the same direction. Second, it's about building trust through design, not just trust with our customers in the brand and product experience, but trust with leadership throughout design process. And third, and this is really key, we do blur the lines between product and brand design at Radar. And this ensures our brand shows up consistently across, every touch point. We essentially function like an internal location design studio, focus on designing product solutions at the intersection of physical and digital. And that just doesn't work if we're siloed.
Yeah, for sure. Super interesting there. So you joined as creative director, focusing primarily, I'd imagine, on the brand side of things. Did you spot like those silos straight away? And also, was there did you spot like a disconnect between those blurred lines at that time between the kind of brand and product design? Yeah. Was it obvious to you when you got there that like this is something that has to be fixed?
I think thankfully we had a great product design leadership at the time who did value brand and like what brand can do for the product experience as well, and vice versa. So it's a very small and mighty team. It's a small company at the time. Maybe we're around 50 to 60 people. So it really wasn't hard for us to collaborate like on a daily basis and really understand what the other team is working on. We had weekly design reviews where product team would share sort of like what they're working on. Same thing with brand. We would share what we're working on. And so I think from the get-go, it was a very collaborative environment and culture, which is really great. And I think it was just the org structure is that we reported to different people. So I do think that was sort of a key change in sort of how we evolved to bring it under one leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Just bring you back in, David, for a second, because you report to a head of design. Is that right? Is it
That's
Johnny?
right. Yeah.
I got that wrong.
Yeah. He's VP of design. Yeah. So I report into him, and he leads the product side of the team. But yeah, there's so much that resonates in what Rachel and Audrey have said there around, like, I think that kind of focus on experience as a kind of a shared goal or a shared intention in the work that kind of gives that level of alignment. I think it carries so much weight, and it blurs the lines, it extends. It's well beyond the beyond the design team, I think there's a ton of alignment across the organization that you're going to need for that to function. Like, we have a really close partnership with marketing, who I think have a really deep understanding of how to leverage design, how to, and to kind of to make it the kind of the heart of what they're doing as well.
Yeah, 100%. Listen, we've kind of started by talking about a lot of the rosy stuff, how things work really well, how perfect alignment creates happy times throughout the brand and product experience. But obviously it's far from that. There are a lot of challenges that you guys certainly, not so much me. I just sit and talk into a microphone from time to time. But there are a lot of challenges that you guys face pretty much head on when you're constantly striving to create more unified, more aligned brand and product experiences. Rachel, I want to start with you on this one. We spoke a little bit, you and I have spoken several times. Something that gets covered quite a bit is design systems. Now, if you're lucky to have kind of really robust design systems within the business, that's great. It can obviously help and support how a brand shows up in a product, but it can also potentially hinder it as well. What kind of how's that kind of manifested itself in your world, and how do you when a kind of robust design system is going a bit too far and it starts to hinder how a brand shows up in a product, how do you tend to tackle that?
I love this because I feel like it's such a critical and healthy tension. So design systems are absolutely essential for scaling brand across large organizations. I feel like there's no other way to maintain consistency when you have dozens or hundreds or thousands of designers working simultaneously, but they can definitely hinder the process if you're not careful, to your point. I do think that the design systems that work best for brand expression are the ones that bake brand principles into the components from the start, rather than treating brand as this decorative layer applied afterwards. So for example, let's say hypothetically, instead of just documenting, use this shade of blue, a truly, brand informed system tends to capture the why. So maybe that blue conveys trust in onboarding moments or energy in celebration moments. Where systems tend to hinder brand is when they become too rigid or reductive. So I've seen teams create a lot of beautiful guidelines or system toolkits that end up getting lost in translation because the system only offers like prefabricated solutions, and then everything starts looking the same, and then the brand becomes homogenized. So my approach, or what I've noticed as I don't know, some of the most successful companies doing this, they end up empowering teams to build more let's call it like tiered flexibility into their system. So for example, tier 3 more utility functions can be highly systematic, and that's fine, but more tier 1 brand defining moments maybe need room for custom expression within the system's principles. And the key is being explicit about when teams should use the system as is versus when they should treat it as a foundation to build upon and perhaps play or experiment or push, kind of breaking the system a little bit. And then it is worth mentioning, I do think that, good design is not just about making something look beautiful. It also has to work. So definitely not, making sure you're thinking about what the functionality and all that comes with it, and that leveraging user research can definitely help validate these systems too. All this to say, I do think that having systems in place are key. Then building teams or empowering teams to know when to break them or when to build or evolve them is also important. So not just kind of over relying on the systems so that the teams feel limited, but thinking of them as like healthy constraints to work within, and then being able to build on them when it feels like it's worth it, or that you have room to play based on, again, like whether that's leadership guidance or whatever's part of that business roadmap. So I love this question because you talk about kind of supporting or hindering the brand, and kind of knowing when and how to push. Again, also maybe depends on the leader, the creative director, whoever is pushing the team forward. But yeah, a good system in place is worth kind of figuring out where and when to break it too is also important, or when to build upon it.
I mean, that is super, super interesting. I want to come back to something that you mentioned there, because I think it's so interesting. I feel a lot of people watching this will identify with the whole idea around permission. And, you know, when or how, you know, teams can, or certainly leaders can apply or can kind of embody, manifest, live those permissions so that everybody in the business understands, you know, to what extent they can push boundaries in certain places and can't in others. Is that something that can be learned? Is that something that can be embedded in a team's culture, or does that really kind of ultimately stem from the top and that's kind of just always there?
It's a good question. I guess my immediate thought would be that similar to design, just generally, there's a saying from an old mentor who would talk about, you know, you'd have to like master the rules in order to earn the ability to break them. And I feel like you should embody the brand and understand the principles and the system very deeply in order to know when and how to break the system or build on it. In terms of that being something that can be learned, I think so. I think it's a muscle that can be flexed, and then having good leadership in place to critique the work or push the work or react to, you know, that push and pull that's happening as the brand is evolving is again having those healthy conversations internally. You're going to get also a lot of feedback from the users or the people, you know, interacting with the brand. And so as you implement certain systems, being in tune with the perception of the brand and how people are, again, using it kind of in real time. I think one very specific example that's coming to mind right now, where that permission is kind of being talked about more, is in the AI space. I'm just noticing a lot of my friends who are leading brand teams within AI products that they're building these systems, but the permission to play is kind of inherent in how they're working, just because of the newness of like, what does it mean to build an AI product or build AI brands from scratch. And so there's a lot more experimentation. But that being said, there's also a lot of AI tools right now some of them kind of look the same or are using similar DNA or sensibilities or iconography to even speak to what AI means. And that's because it's so new. So they're leaning on certain systems that feel familiar and a lot of behavioral patterns that feel familiar. But then again, they're trying to also differentiate themselves because it's such a crowded market. And so they're trying to kind of build their system or kind of push it into directions so they feel really distinct. And it's really exciting to watch that from the outside.
It is really exciting. Yeah. I mean, I'm almost glued to it, to be honest. But it's super interesting actually speaking to some of the people kind of, like you said, friends and colleagues of yours who are in those businesses. I'm fortunate enough to have had a couple of conversations, and it's super interesting for them. But some of them, I think, feel like they're making it up as they go along.
Yeah. Just to plug. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to plug, I think one of your other speakers, or Everett, I know who just left Anthropic. I don't know if that comes up during his talk, but I know he has a very specific opinion about it, which is awesome.
He certainly does, and thank you very much for the plug. And while we're plugging, I'll just plug another session of ours as well. The panel session on Thursday is called Navigating the Human and AI Partnership, and it's definitely worth tuning in for as well. Right, that's the end of the plugs now, I promise. Thank you, Rachel. That's super, super interesting. It's coming back to another theme that's forming part of this conversation as well, which is healthy collaboration and communication within teams. You know, ultimately, I think that is ultimately where any great work gets done, particularly when brand and product have to align. That's really becoming clear right now. Audrey, a really straight question to you. What's the biggest challenge that you come up against at Radar when you're trying to create that cohesive brand and product experience?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question, and there are like really two parts to how I would like to answer this question. I think first, it's really prioritizing time to get outside and dog food our product. So, as a technical product that's inherently physical, dealing with real world location use cases, dog fooding is critical for both designers and engineers. You just can't build these products sitting behind a desk, and I think this naturally tends to fall on product designers, but I think it's equally important for brand designers to also get out there. They need to experience the product firsthand so they can accurately translate those technical aspects into visually compelling creative that's accessible and understandable for our customers and products and prospects, excuse me. I would say the second challenge is finding the right balance in our design approach and internal review process. So, as we all know, the two disciplines are very different, not at a strategic level per se, where we both require research and discovery to understand our audiences and the problems we're solving, but in exploration and execution. And I would say there's like this healthy tension where one discipline, approaches design more conceptually and the other more functionally. Brand design focuses on painting the picture with big, broad strokes, evoking emotion and mood. I think details can come later. Product design focuses on technical requirements and user flows for optimal experiences. And I think, as a team, figuring out where and when to dig into the details, especially early in the design process, can be a bit tricky when we're moving incredibly fast. But in the end, it all comes together. But I think we're constantly learning and evolving our process.
I mean, that is honestly the last point of yours is one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to put this session on. Because I think what you mentioned there around kind of the ultimate the attitude, for want of a better word, the attitudes of kind of brand design and the aspirations of why people become brand designers, to make those big broad brushstrokes and have a real impact on the brand, are quite different from why people want to get into product design. I think in terms of how a user experiences a product, and obviously constantly looking to improve that. But ultimately, as I said, the reason why we wanted to put this session on, because those two things have to coexist. As the person at Radar who leads both of those, who tries to kind of corral both of those things into one, and obviously it's your first time doing this role as well. Like, what's kind of how do you approach doing that in the best way possible to manage those tensions, I guess?
Yeah, I will say, it does go back to our leadership. Keep plugging in Nick Patrick, our CEO and co-founder. Like, it really does come from leadership supporting this, having this vision, and creating a team that really ladders up to him and sort of like ultimately ensuring that we are delivering on sort of the aligned goals of the company and like the direction as a business. And then I'm also going to plug in our two really great designers that we have on the team. We have a product designer and senior product designer and senior brand designer, who I think all three of us work really extremely well together, and just have a genuine curiosity for what the other discipline is doing, and also have this really great ability to jump in and step in where the gap is, right? So again, as things are becoming more blurred between these two disciplines, I think there's like a willingness to step in and do what it takes collectively to get us moving forward. So I think that's how we deal with the tension. It's not always easy. Sometimes we get the vision and we're completely aligned with leadership. Sometimes it takes a few rounds, and it's like a daily conversation and a daily review. I think one key difference coming from a design agency background is you tend to do these big presentations, right? You kind of go away, you work on something for like a week, and you come back and you want it to feel really polished. But working at Radar, and as we're all kind of figuring things out, it's almost like on a daily basis that we're having to share our work, be a lot more willing to be vulnerable and share things that's under the hood of our very messy process. So I think there's a bit of humility that comes in with what we do, and just recognizing that you're working among, you know, a team of like experts in what they do, and like being willing to learn from that and ask the questions, and also, you know, push back when you kind of feel like, no, actually, you know, I have some experience in this area. This is sort of like what I think. And just making sure you're having those dialogues frequently has been really important here at Radar.
That's so cool. That's really, really great to hear. And shout out to Nick and all the other CEOs who are design-led, design-driven. And David, well, I'm sure you'll have been listening to that and thinking so many parallels between Radar and Tynes. You know, you've got leadership who really, really value the appreciation of design. You guys work super closely together on the brand and the product design teams to kind of collaborate and have dialogue. But obviously, I'm sure there are tensions from time to time as well, like any business. How do you guys tend to resolve any tensions that crop up at times?
I think the kind of the goal is always balance. I think tensions for me typically reveal a kind of an opportunity that I've yet to see a time at my time at Tynes where there was any kind of disagreement, where there wasn't like a bit of truth to both sides of the argument. And I think, you know, that can be like they perceived like kind of functional versus emotional, or, you know, time versus resources, or so on. And I think like taking those examples, I think what I kind of tend to do, or try to do, is take those things that feel like they're apparent opposites, or apparently kind of opposed to each other, as ways of working or ways of thinking, and look for opportunities to kind of find the shared truth and the shared path forward between the two. And I think like that's, for me as a brand designer that sits in the product team, you're kind of in that position really regularly, because you have that kind of daily kind of shipping cadence of the product team at Tynes, who ship extremely quickly. And then we have the other side of the organization who move very fast, it must be said, but they typically work on a kind of quarterly cadence, very much aligned to the kind of go-to-market goals and that side of the organization. So, you know, in our daily work, we're bridging the kind of those different kind of coexisting cultures, ways of working, ways of thinking about our input and the impact that it has. So for me, it's just always about kind of finding the shared truth, not as a kind of a means to compromise, but hopefully as a kind of a launch pad for where I think a lot of the most interesting work gets to start or to happen.
Yeah, sure. Are there any tension points in your world? Because, you know, obviously on paper, there are quite a lot of kind of opposites in terms of the ways that brand and product teams work. So for instance, brand prioritizes, you know, that level of consistency, you know, not chopping and changing things all the time. Obviously product teams, like you say, are shipping constantly. So there's constant kind of needs for tweaks, alterations, things like that. Does that ever create some, I mean, could be healthy tension, could be unhealthy tension, but just the need to kind of constantly be looking for, you know, newness, better, more effective ways of working. And then obviously the brand kind of side of things wants to prioritize consistency and not chopping and changing things too much from a brand perspective.
I think actually this role has taught me a huge amount, or kind of revealed or made me reflect on some of my, what I felt were strongly held beliefs around those kind of things. For example, I now really feel that a brand, like there's a ton that we can learn as brand designers, or take from brand designers, from that kind of iterative approach that we see our kind of partners in product adopting. And I guess what that means to me is that like really the brands that I, you know, aspire to emulate, or to, you know, that I would love Tynes to be like, are the ones that are in a constant state of reinvention and development. And honestly, I find that really exciting. You know, it's never, you know, I don't think we're ever on this, you know, we're never going to reach a conclusion in this journey, really, you know, and it's always kind of moving forward in the most appropriate way possible. There's a kind of a quote I've heard, it's like a constant state of departure and arrival at the same time. And I found actually being on an in-house team really freeing in that respect. Audrey referred to the kind of the presentation kind of moments. That would have been a huge kind of characteristic or kind of facet of my life in the kind of agency and studio life. And I've started to kind of like, and I was really comfortable working in that way. But I started to kind of question the extent to which those things are really just manifestations of a kind of a business engagement that has a dependency on that kind of moment of reveal. And now in this place, we have this opportunity to kind of invite people into the process, to show them your probably terrible sketches or your half-baked ideas, but to bring them into that conversation so much earlier, I find that really kind of invigorating. And you're challenged in totally new and different ways, but I guess those challenges are what makes the work kind of compelling or interesting for me.
Yeah, nice. And you've actually segued perfectly into the final segment of the conversation, so I do appreciate that. Thank you very much. Which is kind of, I want to move on a little bit to talking about how we're always moving, how we're always improving, within these relationships, and especially around some of the points that we've talked about already, like how we're improving the way that we communicate with our colleagues, how we're improving the way that we always try and strive for iteration, constantly looking to improve the way that we do things from a process point of view, but also from an output point of view, obviously, as well. Audrey, back to you. Obviously, as I mentioned before, this is your first role as the brand and product design leader. When you're looking to improve, when you're looking to kind of push yourself, where do you tend to get your inspiration from?
Yeah. I think being in tech, I definitely learn a ton from product leaders who are at the forefront of their industry. So listening to them share their experiences, building products and teams is incredibly valuable for me. And I find that Lenny's podcast, which you may all be aware of, has been a really great resource for that. So I just love to hear the stories and like real lived in experiences from these product leaders. I also love Monocle on Design, another sort of a podcast. They cover everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design, featuring guests and exhibits from all over the world. And they also have a print publication, which I really enjoy. So it's like really blending tech with art and like never forgetting the importance of like being well-rounded and understanding all these different points of views, I think is really important for me. But then honestly, and I kind of shared it with this panel before we went live, but I think traveling is my ultimate source of inspiration. I actually just got back from a 2-week vacation in Italy this past Saturday. The people, the food, the culture, it's all incredible. And I think at the end of the day, just getting outside of the everyday helps me reset, clear my mind, and just gain fresh perspective that fuels my work when I come back.
Nice. Do you and your team work remotely, or do you get office time with them as well, like FaceTime?
That's a great question. We actually are a 4-day in-person office culture. So Monday through Thursday, we're in office. Friday is optional. But you know what? We find that actually a lot of people do come in on Fridays as well. And we find a ton of value to have that FaceTime. So so we work incredibly collaboratively as a team and with our leadership on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to mention that because I feel like this constant drive to improve what we do as individuals, but also as teams as well. Like I think the biggest theme of this conversation so far has been communication and collaboration. Sometimes that gets lost when we're working fully remotely. Not all the time. I think obviously people have found really effective ways to work as we've done it more and more. So I'm not just dismissing it outright and saying that you can't succeed as a fully remote team. But I was just interested to know, and that's quite surprising actually, because I don't hear that very often, that you guys are in 4, possibly 5 times a week working together. So do you find time as a team to kind of go out and get kind of inspiration from outside the 4 walls of the office?
We definitely do. We go to kind of design meetups. We've gone to product design meetups. Work & Co had a design event at their location in Brooklyn, so we've gone there together as well. And I think beyond just like design-oriented events, I think we do have a lot of like happy hours. They have a lot of great monthly events that are put together just to help create that culture of just enjoying each other as people, I think, as humans, and like really enjoy just spending time together. It's been really good. We do work incredibly hard during our office hours and when we're working, but we also like to kind of play well together as well. One thing an interesting note is like when I first started at Radar, I was fully remote. So it wasn't entirely impossible. I was like remote for about a year and a half, based out of Seattle, and just kind of made that decision to move out here in New York. So I've kind of seen both sides, and I think there are pros and cons to both ways of working. But I will say being in the office has really propelled, I guess, my growth here, and has really deepened my relationship with leadership team as well as my teammates and colleagues being in the office.
Nice, very, very nice. Rachel, I wanted to move on. I wanted to talk about something when we talk about improvement that's super important that we haven't covered at all in this conversation, actually, but I think it really, really needs covering because I know how passionate you are about it as well. Because when we talk about, let's talk about accessibility. So most products still don't meet core accessibility standards. So we know for a fact that inclusivity and accessibility are areas within product design that require massive improvement still. As I said, I know this is something that you're really, really passionate about. So for you, what needs to happen to make these steps of improvement a reality?
Well, first of all, thanks for bringing this into the conversation. I feel like you can't talk about brand and product and not cover this in some way. I feel like the kind of fundamental reframing of what these words mean, or thinking about accessibility and inclusion, not as just checkbox items, but to core design principles that actually improve outcomes for everyone, is really important. And it's not just the right thing to do, it's actually good business. I do have like 3 things to say about this. So the first is starting with team composition. If your team doesn't reflect the diversity of the community that you're serving, you're already behind. But representation alone isn't enough. As leaders, you need to create psychological safety where different perspectives are not just welcomed, but actually actively sought out. And then this connects back to something I think about a lot, but I tend to help design how people work, not just think about the final output. So really thinking about the culture of the team, and how to kind of foster these healthy conversations, and then building more inclusive processes are really important, because then more inclusive products follow more naturally. The second is to build accessibility and ethical standards into your process from the beginning, and not just as an afterthought. So I'm all about moving fast and breaking things, but often if breaking things, the first thing to go tends to be equity. If you're moving so fast and not putting measures in place where you're talking about or building these inclusive practices, because I don't think building in these standards slow you down. They can actually make you more efficient and effective. And then when you have diverse perspectives in the room from day one, you tend to catch problems or edge cases earlier. You understand users more deeply, and then you create solutions that tend to work for broader audiences. And then the third is being able to measure what matters. So if equity and accessibility aren't part of your success metrics in some way, they will always be deprioritized when the deadlines start to loom. And tech tends to respond to metrics, as many of us know. So figuring out where and how to document the business impact of inclusive design. So whether that means tracking how diverse teams perform, or measure accessibility improvements, maybe even start quantifying user satisfaction. I will say, being based in the United States right now, it's just an interesting time, because I feel like even the term DEI is starting to become more weaponized in some contexts. And I believe that organizations still deeply care about what those words actually represent: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can tell how passionate I am. I won't speak more on this because I know we're coming up on time, but I have learned that there's a fundamental difference between designing for everyone and designing with everyone. And, the former assumes that you can anticipate needs from the outside, and then the latter recognizes that the communities that we're designing for should be active partners in the process. And it's that collaborative foundation that can really help drive design decisions in more authentic perspectives versus assumptions. And that type of advocacy that I think a lot of leaders that I've come across can really put those measures in place. But being willing to advocate for this work, even when it feels uncomfortable, is key, and not waiting for permission, and really centering equity in the design decision, or amplifying marginalized voices in a meeting. It can really, shift culture one interaction at a time if you know where and when to invest in these spaces. So again, just to summarize, like, not really thinking of it as an afterthought or just like a checkbox item, but building what we're talking about into the process, across the organization at various touch points is really, really important.
No, it's super important, and I wouldn't worry too much about time. We've got a couple more minutes to talk, and there was one question I really wanted to follow up with, because I think it's super important. Obviously, we've spoken a lot in this session about how design culture comes from the top. Is this also something that comes from the top, in the sense of, obviously there's a political climate now that is deprioritizing DEI, and obviously I'm being very general here, obviously, as you can tell, but is there a risk that leaders want to be seen as aligning with that political culture, so kind of deprioritizing it comes from the top, and that filters then down into the product design side of things? Is there a risk there?
I mean, there is a risk. I would say generally, though, I hope to see that that this doesn't become something that where there's a lot of like fear in the day-to-day. So depending on whoever's in charge, there are definitely some business roadmap decisions that are being made that start to deprioritize this. And so I do think it's our responsibility as creative leaders, to try and figure out ways to keep pushing on this in ways that feel safe, and where everyone can feel like there's alignment. And so that's where maybe it's just talking about it in different ways, finding new language. It's just, I understand, being more careful or cautious, but that you try to, if you take this out of the equation for products, I do think that the products are at risk, not resonating with users, or not working or not meeting certain business goals. So again, like trying to speak the business language and talking about certain risks that may happen if you do end up moving in a different direction. I did want to touch on just one thing you said, which is I do think culture and the care that can be put towards this type of investment shouldn't just come from the top. I think it comes from anyone, and building teams or environments where everyone feels safe to speak up and share their perspective, share their voice, and hopefully then that there's more advocacy on the team, and people really feel like they're building something together if you're creating spaces where that commitment to inclusion and diversity, again, that comes from like hiring people to be on the team all the way to certain processes that you put in place, that culture shift or really caring about that just feels like it's part of how you work, and that really it shouldn't just be a top-down decision, but something where everyone feels like they have a voice that's worth sharing.
Yeah, completely agree. Really, really good point. So thank you so much, Rachel.
Sure.
David, just one last question to you before we wrap up. Talking about improvement, what are some of the practical steps you and your counterparts in product design take to make sure that you guys are always improving as a collective design team?
I think dialogue, and I think those kind of spaces where the team, like where anyone in the team, regardless of hierarchy, gets an opportunity to to kind of show their work, to share their work, to share their perspective and their point of view are kind of mandatory, really, for a successful team to function. And then I think, like, from my own perspective, it's kind of identifying opportunities for improvement, especially, I suppose, focusing on the brand side. I'm gonna try with the team to identify projects that are standalone enough for us to kind of try something new that's going to push things forward for us, or challenge us in a new way, or represent something that we haven't had a chance to do until that point. So, and there's kind of huge crossovers between those ways of kind of thinking and operating, because each new project or each new kind of area of work that you take, that you identify as an opportunity for that kind of development, also is an opportunity for a group of people within the team to kind of gather together around that work. So they kind of cross over in lots of really interesting kind of, hopefully, kind of cross-pollinating, kind of productive ways, and give that kind of vehicle for kind of constant forward momentum, really.
Nice. Yeah. And just one thing I was thinking about there in terms of new folks joining your teams, like, how do they kind of do you have processes in place where they feel that culture straight from the off, in terms of that constant drive to kind of communicate, collaborate, keep that dialogue going? Like, do you hire very specific people to kind of come in and fit that mold when you're looking for additions to your kind of, actually not just the brand design team, but the product design team as well?
I think from my perspective, there's a few things. There's definitely my personal obsession with typography is never, it's not something an attribute I hope that most of the folks in the team share. But I think there's that kind of, like, there's, from a personality point of view, there's a certain, like, there's that kind of focus on craft, but then there's someone who can think in systems, has a point of view that will actually bring a kind of a new perspective. And I think, like, in any role, and this isn't, I don't think, restricted to design, but that appetite for kind of continuous learning as well, and kind of seeking out the new, and that curiosity that underpins it. I think for me, that's, that kind of individual is going to be an asset to any team, I'd hope, but certainly for a design team, I think it's really important.
Yeah, definitely. And for the second time in this session, you've segued perfectly into something else that I wanted to say. So thank you. You must be reading my mind today. Well, actually, first of all, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the three of you for participating in this panel session. I hope people found it really inspiring. I certainly did. Always learn so much from these sessions, and you've all been absolutely fantastic. So I really appreciate your time today. The thing that David was segueing really nicely into was a constant appetite for learning. And I'm hoping that by watching this today and registering for Bring Your Own Bold, that's something that you've also shared, because we've got loads of content in addition to this dropping over the next few days. I just wanted to highlight some of the sessions that we've got live today before we finish. You can go onto the hub and check out our keynote session with our CEO, shaped by CEO Nick Farrer, on why we need creativity in our lives. The super smart Phil Lewis, management consultant, has done a lovely session on elevating your team from order takers to strategic partners. Why B2B buyers aren't as rational as they think. You can join neuroscientist Richard Shelton for that one. Dave Brecken from Carter and Nick again from Shaped By have put together a wonderful piece on how to build a vibrant culture in creative teams. Adam Morgan is the VP of Brand at Twilio, and his session on elevating creative leadership into the boardroom is a must-watch, in my opinion. And then lastly, we have an interactive pulse check that reveals how far your brand is leaning into bold, which is called How Bold Is Your Brand Really? That's an interactive thing that you can do at your leisure, and it will spit out some results that may or may not interest you. We'll see. But listen, lastly, thank you very much to Rachel, to Audrey, and to David again. I'm Dave Corlett, Business Director at Shaped By, and thank you so much for joining this session today. Please do check it all out. All right.
Thanks for having me.